Hello friends, welcome back. I have just finished reading Fleabag, the scriptures, after having watched it 2 times. Naturally, I have become completely obsessed with Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I also watched the first season of Killing Eve recently, and I just cannot get over how good she is, and I want to be her. So I'm going to read some of her favourite books, and I'm going to see what I think of them, see what I feel like they say about her, and I'm going to massively overanalyze it, and I just can't wait. The ones I've chosen are East of Eden, Frankenstein, and Forever by Judy Blume. East of Eden is just massive, and look at this. Look at that tiny, tiny font. Look at that scary, tiny font. I actually don't know very much about this book other than the fact that it's a classic and it's really good. Look at this. Look at this bookmark that I've been using recently. Is that for me? It's from the Wildlife Photographer of the Year exhibition. It's one of those little magnet bookmarks. The second one, another classic, is Frankenstein. And again, one that I actually don't know anything about. Like, I feel like people talk about Frankenstein loads and people maybe studied it at school and stuff, but I never did that. I feel like it's fun. I'm gonna vlog it, so like you'll see my reaction as I read it, and it'll be a little interesting journey for us. So about Frankenstein, she says, Frankenstein took my breath away, but when I discovered Mary Shelley was 19 when she wrote it, it blew my head off. I love how like these authors just make you feel so inadequate. The third book, I'd never even heard of this book before, to be fair. I actually recommended loads of classics, and these two are ones that were so well known, so I wanted to go with one that I'd never heard of and seemed quite different. Based on the cover art, I think it's quite salacious. She describes it as, the sexy 70s classic Forever by Judy Blume was banned from my school because a certain page was getting the students all sweaty. But any number of detentions were worth being caught with it, and I had 1 or 2 detentions. So this is gonna be an interesting experience on many fronts. I'm gonna start with East of Eden. Wish me luck. Hello, I am 45 pages in. It is set in the early 1900s in California. The first few chapters were just intense descriptions of the landscape. I do think that's something you need to adjust to. It's very easy to get a little bit lost in these huge passages when there's no dialogue, no people interacting. There are already some quite funny lines. My favourite so far was describing a quite serious person as humorless as a chicken. I'm gonna look that up to see if it's like an actual phrase or whether John Steinbeck just was feeling a bit crazy one day. Yeah. No, it seems like he just made that up. The fact that this is a favourite book of hers, she's a clever woman. Okay, I am 100 pages in. It now feels like there are kind of 5 main characters, and we've just been introduced to what I like to think of as the OG manic pixie dream girl. That is Kathy. So yeah, I'm intrigued. Like it's still very, very compelling. I think 10 years, like no, 5 years, 5 to 7 years has passed, and it still feels like we haven't actually started the story yet. It kind of builds up, and then the next chapter it'll like introduce someone else, and we'll start again. Okay, so I've just got to page, sorry, a third of the way through. Okay. I'm gonna put it down and keep reading tomorrow. Hi, so there is a narrator in this book. The narrator isn't a completely outside person, but equally they don't feel like a main character, and I'm just finding it quite interesting because I sort of didn't even realise that the voice was like of someone who existed in that world. Like a few hundred pages in that was introduced, and now even later in, we're like halfway through now, we're finally like finding out a little bit more about the narrator's life. Hey, I just woke up, that's why I am looking and sounding a little bit crusty. I am like 500 pages, so I'm treating myself to the uncarly video about it. Apparently it is meant to be like a retelling of Cain and Abel. It's like brotherly relationships and one of the brothers is favoured by the dad. I also found out that it's meant to be like one of the most complex pieces of literature. So I'm feeling validated because there were points where I was dropping off. I'd say like a third of the way through, I was like, oh, this is rough. But I ground on and it feels really worth it. I'm excited to see like what happens in the end because there's a lot happens. And I've got my favourite characters, I've got my least favourite characters. Good times. Hi, I've just finished, well last night I finished East of Eden and it's an extraordinary book. And I'm just buying Frankenstein now to read today on my commute in. I ran 13 kilometers yesterday. Just thought I'd mention, just so you know, like, I'm better than you know. Ooh. Hey friends. Wow, my skin's looking really good. I'm currently reading Frankenstein on the Kindle and I'm not loving it so far. I can't work out whether I'm just fatigued from reading like East of Eden just before this, and to be fair, this book is like a century older than East of Eden. The language really is very different to what I'm used to. I'm finding it okay, but I'm not enthralled. We're currently setting the scene of Frankenstein, the scientist, and he's at university, and he's getting into science. And with East of Eden, I found it was really kind of obvious why it would be like a Phoebe Waller-Bridge favourite, and you could see her reading it like based on what she's created. But with Frankenstein I'm a bit like, okay, so I've made quite a lot of progress with Frankenstein, but I still am finding like it's not remotely relatable. And I know that like not every book has to be just directly relatable, but with East of Eden it felt like it told stories in such a like engrossing way that kind of revealed things about the like humans and what it means to be human and things. But with Frankenstein I feel like it is meant to be doing that. I'm looking forward to like researching about it after, and seeing if like anything I've been thinking is just like ignorant or whether it's legit, you know, or whether it's like an original thought that like no one's ever thought of before about Frankenstein. Hello friends, I didn't actually film any of Forever because I'm done. I raced through it. It was a very easy read, a relief after Frankenstein, to be honest, but more on that later. So East of Eden is set in the 1900s, like early 1900s. It's a generational story, so it follows multiple generations. I think you end up crossing maybe 40 years in total in the book, maybe even a little bit more. It's based on Cain and Abel, which is the Bible story of two brothers. One of them is favoured by God and the other one isn't, and so the unfavoured one acts out, and then, sorry I say acted out, he murders his brother. So that's what the book's about. It's essentially about brotherly relationships, and there are multiple of them in the book. I would say the main character is Adam, but then Adam has two sons, and then you kind of see that like story traveling through them as well. Even though it's been around for a while, it was published in the 1950s. I don't want to ruin it because I really want you to read it if you haven't already. So much of it also surprised me, like there were little plot twists and things like that. It is definitely a little bit of a grind to get into. The first 100, 200 pages are pretty tough, but ultimately it's such a rich human story. All these long-winded sentences, all these details being described, that whole style of writing, you can see why it's important. Like the whole point of the story is to show this like the humanity of the characters and to give those little details and like the context about their lives, and it kind of helps you understand like why they are the way they are. You also have, you know, characters behaving in lots of different ways. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but because they are written about in so much depth, it doesn't ever feel like they're acting out of character. Like I don't know, they feel so well constructed. So I found that really incredible, and it was just a pleasure to read. I wrote down so many little quotes and stuff. There is this wider moral, and you can really see why it became a classic. But unlike Frankenstein, which I'm going to get onto, I actually thought it was very, very timeless. So much of what was talked about felt like it could have been written this year. So much of it actually followed these male characters. A lot of it was mostly kind of men were main characters. And I felt like they were being given the chance to be rounded individuals. The book was angling it like, yeah, it's actually pretty, I mean, also it wasn't using this language, but it's like these really masculine expectations that we like force on men are bad. And like, I felt that come through in the book. I was just really impressed. And all that to say that I'm completely unsurprised that someone who is a writer and someone who writes about people with such an eagle eye as Phoebe Waller-Bridge would cite this as a favourite book of hers. On to my next tale. I did not like Frankenstein. I gave it 2 stars in my Goodreads review, and it's one of those ones. So as I said with East of Eden, I felt like there is loads of context that you can give it, you know, it is that bit older and things like that, but ultimately you can also read it and really enjoy it without the context. With Frankenstein, I felt like most of the appreciation I had for it, most of the stars that I gave it on Goodreads were because I was really trying to be like, okay Chloe, let's consider the context. It is over a century older than East of Eden, and after a little Google I found it was written after Mary Shelley had a little writing competition with a few of her writing buddies, and they basically were trying to write a horror story. Having said that, I found that it totally lacked tension. I thought it would feel at least a little bit scary, and it just didn't. So its kind of overarching themes are the idea that like man creates monster because he's like really pushing science to the limits. And the other theme is this theme of abandonment. So the big thing in Frankenstein is the scientist who creates the monster is so horrified by his creation that he abandons the monster. And then the monster ends up doing pretty monstrous things because he's so lonely and society keeps rejecting him. Even when he tries to do things that are objectively really like good things to do, so he saves a child from drowning and things like that, he is still shunned and excluded, and you know, people attack him and things just because of how ugly he is. And maybe this is a spoiler if you care to read the book. I won't tell you the ending, but the book is basically about the monster asking Frankenstein to create him a lady monster so that he isn't lonely. And it kind of mostly follows Frankenstein, who's then being followed by the monster, and Frankenstein's kind of moral dilemma over whether to actually create this extra monster and things like that. But I found that the way it was written was really tough. There were really, really long paragraphs in the same way that you had with East of Eden, but it kind of always often felt pointless and just boring. I really didn't like it. I also found Frankenstein was just a bit unbearable. I also thought the overall setting and perspective of the book was really odd. So yeah, this book just kind of caught me off guard. I think it kind of speaks to Phoebe Waller-Bridge being ultimately an intellectual, because I just didn't get loads out of it. Moving on to Forever. So this was so refreshing to read after Frankenstein. I actually didn't like ultimately enjoy it loads. I think it's probably a really positive book to read if you're a teenager, which I think it is aimed at. Like the characters are 17 and 18. So you kind of have to take it with that pinch of salt. I actually gave it the same rating that I gave Frankenstein, but for like completely the opposite reason. Like these books are just opposite in entirety. It's basically about 2 teenagers who fall in love, and it's kind of that like first love story. I won't ruin the end in case you want to read it, but pretty light reading, nice characters around both of them, and it was published in the 70s, and to be fair, like with that in mind, it must have been really, really groundbreaking because it is quite like a sex positive book, and I definitely think reading that I can see Fleabag in it. It was nothing like Fleabag, but just the idea of something that is explicit, I could definitely see how Phoebe Waller-Bridge was influenced by it. And the explicitness also reminded me of how Fleabag especially the humor. It can feel almost slapstick. I don't know if that's the right word. Just like obvious, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, or like cheeky, and I could see that in this book. So yeah, all in all, I'm actually so glad I ended up choosing these books, because East of Eden I could see it as an influence, because it's like, wow, big brain, intellectual, you know, talking about humans, really digging deep into characters, their motivations, like what made them the way they are. And then Forever, which is kind of that upper layer of cheeky, blunt, to the point. Like, in a sense they feel like such different books, but you could really see how a Fleabag or a Killing Eve comes from those two pieces. And then Frankenstein, yeah, as I said, I didn't like. Anyway, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm especially interested if you have read Frankenstein and what you think of it, because I did feel a little bit self-conscious going on to like the reviews online, and you have this contrast of like some people agreeing with me and then some people, and I'm quoting now, "This was the 6th time this week I read this book. I love it. It is perfect. Thank you, Mary Shelley." It's a 300-page book, so like, why are you reading this every day of the week? Anyway, I need to stop thinking about Frankenstein. Maybe that's the point. Maybe it's like that. It's like thought-provoking and you're like not meant. Anyway, have a lovely day. Goodbye.